What's up, ComicWow? This is Gigi coming at you from San Diego Comic-Con International 2015, and I'm delighted to be interviewing again the one, the only Mark Waid.
That's me. Hi.
Haven't seen you since Baltimore. Everything been treating you well so far at this con?
Everything's been great at the show. Yeah.
I feel like we have so much to talk about right now as far as projects you're involved in. So first and foremost, let's let the ComicWow fans know the biggest project you're working on right now.
Right now, the biggest project I'm working on is Strange Fruit, which is a book from Boom Studios with J.G. Jones.
Tell us a little bit about the story.
It's historical drama. It's basically J.G. had an idea he's been nursing for as long as I've known him, about 1927 Mississippi, which was the site of the greatest natural disaster in American history at that point, which was the floods of the Mississippi that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. And his idea for the story was a strange visitor shows up during that period, sort of a silent man, who, sort of a Clint Eastwood, man with no name sort of figure, shows up in the middle of all this chaos and this racial tension and the natural disaster and so forth. And he's a giant black man, and so that doesn't sit well with a lot of the white folks in town. And what sort of tension does that create in the town, and what does that do to change the dynamic of the people in that town? It's a beautiful looking job. The first issue came out yesterday. It's 4 issues altogether. It's myself and J.G. Jones, and he's doing, he's co-plotting, he's doing the art, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful looking book.
Now, when you're doing a story like that, that's so in depth in emotion, what do you feel at the finale of that book? Are you feeling like, that took a lot out of me? Or are you feeling like, wow, like the kind of culmination of the full circle of emotion?
That's a good question. You really do. It really does take a lot out of you to really dig deep like that. And when I do, I do a lot of different projects, but I really can't do more than one thing like every day. I basically have to say, okay, today is my Strange Fruit Day, or today is my Archie Comics Day, or today is my Avengers Day, or whatever, because you sink so deeply into that, and you have to, it's like acting, you have to sort of get in the heads of the characters and really inhabit that world, and especially if you're trying to tell something with some gravitas to it, like Strange Fruit, you really have to be sold on it. So at the end of the day, I'll come home and my girlfriend's like, you want to have a conversation? I'm like, I'm really not. I need the transition period.
Maybe on an Archie day we can talk.
Yeah, exactly. Right now I just need to kind of sit here and reabsorb into the world. Yeah.
How do you do that though? Because I feel like that's got to be the hardest thing to get around, is literally, first of all, as a writer, deciding, okay, today I'm going to write, because it's like everything has to be inspiring, but also to switch gears like that. On one day be Archie and the next day be Strange Fruit. How does that work?
If I knew, my job would be easier. But the God's honest truth, and every writer in any medium will tell you the same thing. We have to relearn that every single day. Every time you sit down at the keyboard, you have to relearn whatever it sparks you to enthusiasm. Because every one of us spends the first hour of our day checking email and surfing the web and looking up that obscure reference and maybe checking out last night's Daily Show, because you're trying to build that momentum. I wish I knew the answer. But once you find it, once you drill down and find that one line of dialogue or that one moment that you hadn't thought about before, that one idea, then generally that's enough to like start the endorphins moving, and then you go and you go and you go.
Now, switching gears, of course, again, the Archie reboot. How did that come about? How did you get involved?
I would flabbergasted. They called me late last year. I've known the Archie guys for a long time, but they called me late last year, and they said, well, we want to really do a huge paradigm shift, and not just like paper over stuff or give it a slight tweak or a slight upgrade, but really get this character contemporary and make it look like a 21st century world, and make the characters a lot more relatable to modern day stuff. And my first thought was, my hand to God, that is a weird question to ask a 53-year-old man to do.
Bring us to the current days, Mario. You have your finger on the pulse of what teenagers are into these days.
You have the voice of your generation, Mr. Waid. So I went into it with trepidation, but one of the things I think I do well is I like taking the characters, whether it's Superman or Spider-Man or Archie or any of these characters that have been around since before I was born, and really dig deep and try to figure out how is it that those characters continue to exist and continue to be vital in a world where, like Woody Woodpecker or Betty Boop or whatever, characters that exist and are off the radar and just kind of vanished became sort of footnotes in nostalgia. What is it about those characters? And so that's the fun of the job for me. So drilling down, what you find out with Archie is that, yeah, my high school experience is clearly different than your high school experience is different than my 15-year-old stepdaughter's experience, but there are certain things about being a teenager that are always the same. There's always the feeling of angst, yeah, of not knowing who you are. You're starting to be an adult, and you don't know who you are yet, and you don't know what your identity is, and it's so easy to be embarrassed, and everything feels like it's the end of the world, and everything feels like it's forever, and you always feel like when you do something, you're the first person in history to ever do that, and all of these things are really important parts of what makes so that's the stuff that's like that translates from generation to generation in terms of teenagers. But luckily, those are also the building blocks of any really good story, is the emotions of it and how people feel about things.
Now, how do you balance taking a reboot and being able to, is it like just reinventing the character or revising it for a new generation with just them in mind? Or are you thinking also, I've got to maintain the original fans? Like somebody like me, I have Betty Veronica tattooed on my back. I've always been a diehard Archie fan. So how do you do that balance of the previous fans and the new fans?
That is the hard part of the job. But I think that the way you do it, let me use Fiona Staples as the artist as the example. And again, that's one of the reasons I signed on to, because Fiona is amazing. She has Saga. She's won awards. She's amazing artist, and she loves the Archie characters. She adores them. She's like the same way I love Superman. She loves the Archie stuff. And so by tapping Fiona to do it, you knew she wasn't going to come in and swing her ego around and try to make the characters look like the way she wanted them to look. What she instead did was say, okay, what can I do to interpret these characters in a way that's consistent with the way they've always looked, but is still somewhat in my style? So, and I feel the same way about writing the characters. Like there's just certain things you don't need to change because it's easy. The easy thing about, it would have been easy to write Archie as, page 1, panel 1, Jughead has a heroin needle sticking out of his arm. Well, that's...
Yikes!
I know.
That's just what the kids these days are going through, as you know.
Yeah. But I mean, that would have been, that would have been hip and edgy and cynical, and it would have been, and we would have gotten a bunch of headlines out of it and stuff, but that's not what these characters are. That's the easy way to do it. The harder way to do it, like I said, is just try to figure out what it is about those characters that is perennial, that lasts from generation to generation, and focus on those things and worry less about. One of the things I know we didn't do with purpose was we didn't worry about sticking the words Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook and Snapchat into every page, because that's just artificial. That's the stuff that'll date.
Propaganda.
Yeah, anything like that, or anything like that if we're trying to make it seem trendy, it's going to backfire because that'll be out of date by the time it hits print. Yeah.
Well, for somebody, like I said, who's an eternal Archie fan, just hearing the description of it makes it exciting to be able to check it out. So I'll let you know what I really think. Just kidding. But can you remind everybody where they can find out everything more from you, Mark, social media and online?
Absolutely. I am Mark Waid at Twitter, and I am Mark Waid at Facebook, and I am at every convention that there ever is, and I write every comic book that there is. I also have a store, actually, if you're ever through Indiana. I own a store called Aw Yeah Comics in Muncie, Indiana, and come by. I can't guarantee I'll be there to personally sell you a copy of Archie, but there's big giant statues and busts of me in the store, so you can look at those.
Keeping comic book shops alive. We gotta love that. I got one last pop question for you. So we talked about taking a character that's maybe those characters that have fallen off the map a little. If you could take one of the characters that maybe isn't as current right now and reboot them, who would it be?
Do something with it. Wow. That's a really good one. Like, who is in my pack of nostalgia that I'd like to do something with? That it doesn't really count in the sense of like 1930s, 1940s. It's not that old. But if anybody has the Quantum Leap license, call me. Call me.
That's actually a really good answer. That would be really cool to check out.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the time. As always, we know you're a busy guy. And for ComicWow, I'm Gigi. This is Mark Waid, and you're welcome.